What if I told you that 11 men on skis may have prevented Adolf Hitler from getting the atomic bomb? In the dead of winter, in Nazi-occupied Norway, a handful of commandos carried out one of the most daring sabotage missions in World War II, if not all of history, crippling Germany's nuclear ambitions. No conflict in history saw the massive technological race for better weapons systems than World War II. Due to necessity, technology and electronics, mechanical innovations for ships and aircraft, and communications all moved at light speed. But there was also the race for the atomic bomb. The British and U.S. were jointly working on the top-secret Manhattan Project, which would result in the first successful atomic bombs being developed and then deployed against Japan. But they were not alone. Nazi Germany was also working on the bomb, and the Allies had to respond. What was Operation Gunnerside? Why was it conceived? How was it planned? How was it executed? Was it successful? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. At the height of the Nazi regime in 1938, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin discovered that bombarding certain elements with neutrons caused them to split. Bombarding uranium, it turned out, would release high amounts of energy when its nucleus was split in two. Physicists Lisa Meitner and Otto Robert Frisch then coined the name nuclear fission. The scientists saw that atoms could be split again and again in a chain reaction that, when controlled in a nuclear reactor, could create large amounts of energy. But if left uncontrolled, it could become a very destructive weapon. In the early 1940s, intelligence reports confirmed a chilling fact. Nazi Germany was racing to build a nuclear weapon. To do it, they needed heavy water, a rare substance used to moderate nuclear reactions. Heavy water, or deuterium oxide, was a key component the Germans needed for their nuclear reactor experiments, potentially to build an atomic bomb. The Vemork plant in Telemark County, Norway, was operated by Norsk Hydro. It was already a hydroelectric power plant, so the Germans could just create and store heavy water there until it was ready to use, and it was the only facility in Europe producing heavy water at the required levels. The terrain was well chosen for the heavy water plant, which made it impossible to effectively bomb from the air, hence the direct approach. Vemork was located deep in the rugged mountains of Yukon, Norway. After the German occupation of Norway in 1940, production ramped up. The Allies knew that they had to act fast, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill took a direct hands-on approach to the problem. He launched Operation Grouse by the Special Operations Executive, which placed an advanced team of Norwegian commandos in the nearby wilderness to assess German defenses and guide the future commando teams to the plant during the next phase of the plan. Except the Grouse commandos didn't know what the next phase of the plan would be. Operation Freshman, launched on November 19, 1942 to destroy the facility, did not go as planned. Two Halifax bombers towing Horsa gliders, with each glider carrying 2 pilots and 15 Royal Engineers of the 9th Field Company, 1st British Airborne Division, took off from RAF Skitton near Wick, Caithness, Scotland. Packed with British engineers and commandos, they were towed across the North Sea in a glider-borne landing on the frozen Lake Mostvan, but had bad luck, which intervened and the mission ended in disaster. Bad weather and poor visibility led to crashes. A tow cable on one glider broke, forcing it to return to base, and the survivors upon landing were captured, tortured, and executed by the Gestapo under Hitler's commando order. It was a brutal wake-up call. Churchill re-evaluated that previous failure and realized that to be effective, native Norwegians knowing the terrain, speaking the language, as well as some speaking German in some cases, were probably needed. Churchill wanted the facility destroyed, or at the very least rendered incapable of producing heavy water, so Operation Gunnerside was planned. Although the previous Operation Freshman had failed, it did convince the Germans to increase their aerial and ground patrols in that region in order to prevent a future attack. This actually benefited the Allies, since the Germans never considered any other avenue of approach being feasible. It was then understood that a small team traveling light and moving fast was better than a direct assault with soldiers. They were less likely to be detected and have a better chance of success. Commando operations were still in their infancy, and Norwegians working as commandos with the well-established resistance who knew the people and terrain and being properly trained were considered the best option. Operation Gunnerside was then devised as the follow-up plan. The selected members of the Norwegian resistance were sent to Scotland and England to be trained by the British Special Operations Executive. There, they would enhance their expert skiing, navigation, and shooting skills and learn the dark arts of sabotage, explosives, and close-quarters killing techniques should they be required. Joachim Ronneberg, the commander of Operation Gunnerside, stated, "I was a training officer in sabotage and demolition in the Vemork before I got the first message from London saying I had been picked to lead an operation in Norway. They never mentioned nuclear weapons, they just mentioned heavy water. They never told me what it was used for. We had less than 3 weeks to prepare, to plan our retreat to Sweden, choose the route, get hold of all the maps and intelligence about the target." This 7-man commando team was led by Ronneberg, who handpicked his team. They were designated SOE's Norwegian Independent Company 1 or Company Linge in Norwegian. After completing their intense training, they parachuted into the freezing wilderness, complete with sleds carrying food, explosives, and ammunition, on February 27, 1943, linking up with the Grouse team members. The temperature often dropped to 30 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Carrying heavy equipment, weapons, and skiing through blizzards while avoiding German patrols and aircraft, the combined 11-man team joined forces with a prior recon team already operating in the area. Each man was given a cyanide capsule in case of capture. They were, in fact, not to be taken alive and tortured for information. They had established a solid intelligence profile on the Germans, to include the number of soldiers, rotations of guards, planned escape routes, and possible extraction points. They were also given a map of the layout inside the facility with the critical target components marked. According to Ronneberg, we left our advanced base at about 8 p.m. We started on skis but were forced to continue on foot. It was steep country and we sank up to our waists in snow. We began a steep and slippery descent into the river at 10 p.m. There they waited another 2.5 hours before the guards' shift change and the next phase of the operation was to begin. The Germans believed that the deep canyon, high cliff, and river below were impassable, and they left that approach unguarded. So the commandos took advantage, relying upon the maps of the plant provided by the Norwegian resistance workers. Rather than conduct a frontal assault and try to cross the bridge, they scaled the high cliff, crawled through a gorge, and crept in via a railway tunnel and managed to slip past the unwary Germans. They entered the building itself through a cable tunnel, but the demolition team became separated while searching for an entry point, but Ronneberg and his partner decided to continue the mission. They subdued a guard near the entryway to the heavy water storage room and entered. As Ronneberg stated, "My colleague kept watch over the guard, who seemed frightened but was otherwise quiet and obedient. I began to place the charges, which went quickly and easily. I had half the charges placed when I heard a crash of broken glass behind me. The crash of glass was the other 2 team members of the demolition team who were unable to find an entrance, who forced their way into the heavy water room. They placed the rest of the charges with their timers and told the unarmed German guard, whom they could have killed but did not, to run for cover. Regarding the guard, Ronneberg said, "I remember telling him to keep his mouth open, otherwise he would damage his eardrums. He did this because I spoke to him 2 years later and his hearing was all right." The commando team were about 20 yards away when the detonators went off, and the blast destroyed the heavy water production line, and the Germans didn't even know how the saboteurs got in. Amazingly, the team escaped without a single casualty, and Ronneberg and his men skied hundreds of miles through the snow to escape into neutral Sweden. It put the German nuclear scientists months behind and allowed the United States to overtake the Germans in the quest to produce the first atomic bomb. It was later described by the CIA as the most successful act of sabotage in World War II. The Germans were stunned, and Adolf Hitler was furious. Heavy water production was crippled, but the Germans later rebuilt the damaged parts of the facility by that April, and Churchill and SOE realized that a repeat commando raid would not be feasible, as the Germans had enhanced their security. The Germans, still fearing another attack, tried to move what remained of the heavy water stock to Germany, but the Norwegian resistance sank the ferry SF Hydro in 1944, carrying the water, sealing the fate of Adolf Hitler's nuclear program. Many historians agree that it significantly delayed, if not entirely doomed, Germany's nuclear weapons program. And yet, few today remember the names of those men on skis. The mission was dramatized in the film The Heroes of Telemark in 1965, starring Kirk Douglas as a fictionalized mission commander. Ronenberg would later become among the most decorated war heroes in Norwegian military history. Operation Gunnerside wasn't just sabotage. It was extreme heroism, precision, perseverance, and defiance in the face of tyranny. And now, it is no longer forgotten. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.